Okay, chapter 21 is about budgetary control. So it's using budgets to control your operations and decide how to fix what might be going wrong. We did budgeting work in chapter 20. Now we're going to look at after the time period goes by that you budgeted for. How do you compare what actually happened to what you thought was going to happen to get some kind of idea of what you need to fix? All right, that's what budgetary control is all about. I'm going to let you read a lot of what's in this chapter. I'm going to just focus on the one main study objective that gets at the kind of the heart of the more complicated aspect of the mechanics of this chapter. So study objective one to discuss it just discusses budgetary control and from a conceptual standpoint. Study objective two talks about static budget reports. I'm going to discuss most of what that is in just a second, but there's a little bit of reading that you can do to get a brief idea of what a static budget is. It's not a good way to do budgetary control, and I'll show you why right here just by showing you an example of a static budget report. So here is a static budget report for this company Barton Steel, and they budgeted amounts for these costs for the year ended 2010, and going into that period they thought they were going to produce 10,000 units. So when they thought they were going to produce 10,000 units, they thought their costs were going to be these amounts. All right, well that's all well and good before the fact, but then when 2010 goes by and they actually find out that they really produced 12,000 units, then they see their actual costs for that time period were a lot higher. Especially for the only for the variable costs, but they realized these costs ended up being a lot higher. Now, the reason why static budget reports aren't good is because it is obvious that costs are going to be higher if you produce a lot more units, than what you thought you were going to produce. So it doesn't mean that all of these unfavorable variances are bad. So it's a bad way to look at comparison. What you really need to do is develop flexible budgets so that you can make this budget column be an apples to apples comparison with your actual column. So, but flexible budgets will provide us a way to prepare a budget column based on the actual number of units produced. Okay, that way you'll have an expected cost at, let's say, 12,000 units, and then an actual cost at 12,000 units, and then you can look at those two, compare them, and see, well, now is it favorable or not? And if it's unfavorable, there's probably a reason that you can ascertain and then fix. Okay, so that's the problem with static budgets. The key with determining a flexible budget is figuring out a cost per unit of your variable costs. Okay, a cost per unit, and I think, let me just kind of click around here. This example, this talks about the steps, the case study for flexible budgets. It gives you some variable cost and fixed cost data based on an expected number of hours worked in a particular year. Well, based on that data, you can figure out expected variable cost per hour amounts for these variable costs. And once you have these expected costs per hour, then you can go down, well, this is just preparing a budget at a bunch of different numbers of hours. But more specifically, I'll get down to a report here, you can prepare a budget column at the actual amount of hours. So in this case study, there were 9,000 hours that were actually worked. Okay, 9,000 hours are worked. So these are the actual costs at 9,000 hours of labor. When we can prepare a budget column at that same number of hours, because we know that indirect materials is $1.50 per hour per our budget. That's what we think indirect materials is going to be. So we can multiply $1.50 an hour times $9 an hour, or 9,000 hours, and get our expected indirect material cost. Indirect labor we saw above was $2 an hour, is our anticipated variable cost per hour. So at $2 an hour, that's $18,000 expected indirect labor cost, and utilities I think was 50 cents an hour was our budget for utilities. So at actual of 9,000 hours, we'd end up with a budgeted cost of $4,500. When that time period goes by, you can see the actual costs, and then you can compare and see which ones came in over or under budget. So indirect materials, looks like we spent more on indirect materials than we thought we were going to. So if this number is significant enough to management, they might start to investigate why we were over budget there and take measures to fix it.